Let's get started. Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm Jeremiah Ham with DB Services. Today's session is on relational design and how to implement it using the FileMaker platform. Here's a list of all the companies that contribute to the FM Academy. These are all partner FileMaker Platinum level members. There are 8 today. We work together to bring education and standards to the community through free monthly webinars. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the console. We'll get to them at the end. If you're unable to put them in, you can always email us at fba@dbservices.com. All right, so my background. Again, my name is Jeremiah Hammond. I'm a senior technical project lead at DB Services. I'm certified in the past 6 versions. I've been working with FileMaker for almost a decade now. I'm also a trainer for classes that we conduct here at DB Services. You can read more on me at dbservices.com. Okay, so my assumptions for you all today is that you've created flat files in FileMaker and need to go beyond that. I also am assuming that you've read the FTS basics. For example, you know where and how to create tables, fields, etc. All right, so the topics today, we are going to cover actually creating relationships in FileMaker, but before we do that, I want to go over some basic just relational design data model topics. So we're going to look at identifying relationships and modeling relationships with keys for an example problem, and then I'll go into creating relationships in FileMaker. And then once we're through that, I'm going to touch on ERDs and their importance, and then context. And once you understand context, we'll look at a couple popular graph methodologies out there in the wild. All right, so before you can start building your app in FileMaker, the first thing you need to do is you need to put together a data model, because FileMaker uses relational design as its base to be able to do anything inside of a FileMaker application. And so the first step is you need your list of requirements, right? You need to know what your application, what the goals of the application are, and what exactly it's going to need to solve and what it's going to need to do. And so let's pretend here, let's take this example problem. We're going to use this throughout the rest of the session today. Let's say that you visited a company called ABC Automotive, and they needed to track orders. And when you visited on site, they gave you this list of requirements. This is what you gathered from them. So this application needs to enter and track orders with the ability to assign customers and products to an order. You need to be able to track the status of an order, manage a customer's multiple addresses, track the date of a customer's first order. They also need a dashboard showing actual items. And then they also want to be able to use the application on mobile devices. And so once you have your requirements list, step 1 to start getting your data model together is to identify possible entities. So this is fairly straightforward, this first step. All you need to do here is take your list of requirements and identify all the nouns inside of them. And so I've listed out the requirements here, and I have highlighted in blue which ones are nouns. So, okay, great. We've got our list of possible entities. And so what's the next step? Step 2 is to revise this list. So you need to take the list of nouns, the possible entities, and you need to whittle it down to what the app should track, because not everything in that list is something that the application cares to track. Another way to think about it is what's inside the quote problem space. Problem space being the thing that you're trying to solve. What's the application trying to solve? And so once you have done that, then the next step after that is to, of that list of things it needs to track, which of these are entities and which of these are attributes. And the way I like to think through that is to use a spreadsheet metaphor. When I first started working in FileMaker, I had come from an Excel background. That's what I learned in school, so my mind sort of gravitated that way. So I was having to translate, Excel spreadsheet terms to database terms. So I have this little chart here that actually there's 3 different types of terms, and they're all relevant to our discussion today. So we've got the spreadsheet terms, you've got a worksheet column and row. The data modeling terms that we've been talking about a little bit so far are entities, attributes, and then an individual instance of an entity. And so what you can do is you can compare, you can go, okay, well, I know what a worksheet is, and I know what a column is, and I know what a row is because I'm using spreadsheets, and so then you can translate that to the data modeling terms so you can better understand what you're actually thinking about with data models. So like for example, let's say that you're looking at your list, and in this list is customer, right? In our example problem with ABC Automotive. So is a customer an entity or an attribute? Well, one way to think of this is, well, can a customer be a column inside of a spreadsheet? Yeah, it could. Could it actually be its own entire worksheet? Yes, it could as well. Because it could be its own entire worksheet, that makes it very likely to be an entity. An example of something that it wouldn't really make sense to be its own worksheet, but could be a column, is date, like order date. I doubt you'd have a spreadsheet that listed out order date. That would just be something that would be just like in a column of an order worksheet. So that would be an attribute. So using the spreadsheet metaphor can help you determine of your list of things to track which are entities and which are attributes. And then finally, the third set of terms here on the right are FileMaker terms, database terms. So an entity being a table, an attribute being a field, and then an individual instance of an entity being a record. And I'll do my best to try not to intermingle the data modeling terms, the database terms, but sometimes they get mixed in speech. So I apologize for that in advance. Okay, so here's our revised list of things that we need to track from the problem space. We need to track orders. An order is an entity, customers, products, those are all entities. Order status would be an attribute. Again, it wouldn't be its own worksheet. Customer address, entity, and then the first order date being an attribute. So that is our initial list from the example problem. And so step 3 now, once we've got our initial list, is to put together a more complete list of attributes for each of the entities, because that list that I just showed you only had 2 attributes. There are 2 different dates, and or I'm sorry, one of them was a status, one was a date, and those are just your application. This application is going to need more information for it to solve the problem that it wants to solve. And so how do you determine these attributes? This is part of this is what your client wants to track. So you're going to work with your client to figure out, like, hey, for an order, exactly what information do you need to track on an order? And then part of it too is just you as a developer understanding the goals of the application. You should be able to figure out some of these attributes on your own without having to go to the client. So it's a combination. I have here a few examples. I've started to flesh out a little bit of the attribute list for each of these entities, but this is not a complete list by any means. It just gives you an example, some examples of additional attributes that would be required for this kind of application. All right, so to recap what we just went over, when it comes to data modeling, the first things you need are your entities and your attributes. And so you're going to take your problem example and find your potential entities and attributes. You're going to eliminate things that you don't care to track that are outside the problem space. Then you need to distinguish which ones are attributes, which ones are entities, and then you need to get your complete list of attributes for each entity. And then this process is not like a one and done. You're going to end up refining it over time as you learn more about the business, as you learn more about the application, and people will give you feedback, the testers, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so once you have your entities and your attributes, now the next step is to figure out the relationships between them. Now, unlike the identifying the entities and attributes, identifying relationships is not an exact science. You can identify some relationships with a systematic method, and we'll go over that in a minute, but some of them you can't. So you're ultimately just going to have to think about each entity and how it relates to the other ones to get your list of relationships. But the one systematic thing you can do is you can compare your list of entities and their attributes, if an entity shows up as an attribute in another entity, there's a relationship. So for example, I have the list again of what I was showing you a couple slides back. You can see here that the customer, which is an entity, is also an attribute inside order. That right there tells you that there's a relationship between customer and order. And then in this case, in this particular application, it's a one-to-many relationship. A customer can have many orders. So that works there. Where it doesn't work is the relationship between orders and products. One order can have many products, but one product can also be on many orders. And so you'll see that there's no attributes for each other here. So there's a different way you have to approach that, and I'll go over that in a minute. And so yeah, the types of relationships, there's more than just these two, but these are the two main ones that will get you through most of your development work. And so I'm going to cover those today. So you've got the one-to-manys, which we just looked at, and you've got your many-to-manys, which you also just talked about too. So let's focus on the one-to-manys here. So to be able to implement a relationship inside of a database, you're going to need to create keys and use keys to do that. And so there's two types of keys that you need to be concerned with. And the two main types are primary keys and foreign keys. Okay, so what is a primary key? A primary key is a field in the table that is unique for each record in that table, aka a unique identifier. And when it comes to FileMaker, the two that you'll see that are most common are serial numbers and UUIDs. Now these primary keys, they should never change and they should never be empty. Basically, when a record is created, it should have its primary key immediately, and that primary key should stay the same throughout its entire life. And the best practice is that every table should have a primary key. Every table you ever create should have a primary key. It's best database practice, and it really helps with troubleshooting, among other things. Okay, so then foreign keys, right? Foreign keys are a field in the table that's the primary key of another table. And this is the foreign keys are what make one-to-many relationships work. So for example, to make the one-to-many relationship between customers and addresses work, where you can have multiple addresses for a customer, you're going to need a customer ID foreign key in the address table. All right, and then let's revisit the many-to-many relationships here. So I had briefly touched on that in this application for ABC Automotive, there is a relationship between order and products, and that one order can have many products, and then one product can be on many orders. So if you think about what we just did with the one-to-many relationships with primary keys and foreign keys, you could try to do that with this to try to get it to work, but there's problems. So let's say that I'm like, all right, well, I know about foreign keys, so let me just put a bunch of order ID foreign keys into the product table, maybe 10 or 20. But you're artificially limiting the number of products that could be on an order, or vice versa when you do that. And you could keep creating more keys as you need them, but you're still limiting, artificially limiting, that's a problem. Plus it makes development a lot harder for reasons that we won't go into here. And so the way to solve the many-to-many problem is that you interject an entity between those two entities to make the relationships turn into one-to-manys. So this is the textbook example here for order to product. You interject a line item entity to make it so that you can have multiple orders on multiple products on one order, and then you can have one product be on multiple orders. And the way that you do that is this line item table actually has an order foreign key and a product foreign key. And then you can make, when it comes to an order, you just create as many line items as you need products, and it all works. So many relationships, all you need to know, there's a missing entity that you need to create to transform this many-to-many into one-to-manys. All right, so let's go ahead and go into FileMaker here. We are going to create relationships. I'll show you how to create relationships in FileMaker, and we'll touch on some more advanced topics. Okay, so this FileMaker file that I have here is called FM Quick Start. This is our free template that we provide the community to the community here at DB Services. And I'll give you the website address for that at the end of the presentation. We're going to use this template for the demoing for the rest of the session here today. All right, so let's pretend that ABC Automotive came back to you and said, hey, there's one other thing I need this application to do. I need to be able to store multiple documents to a customer. And you're like, okay, great. So what's the first step here? Okay, well, I need to create a table to do that. So we're going to create a document table. So I'm going to go to this document, the tables tab here in FileMaker, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the table name and create it. And then I'm going to add fields to this table so we can start making relationships. And so the first thing I need to do, because I just made a table, is to make a primary key. So I'm going to do that. And as far as the naming convention, this is what we use here at DB Services. If you want to learn more about that, we actually have a naming conventions document that you can take a look at on our website. So I'm going to create the primary key, and then I'm going to actually make it a UUID. Let's do that. Press OK. And then I'm going to uncheck that do not replace existing value of field to make sure that works properly. All right, so I've made my primary key in the document table. So what's the next thing I need? Well, I need a container field to actually store the document. So I'm going to make a document field. And I'm going to change the type here to container. Let's do that. All right, so we've got our basic document table. But at this point, we can't implement the one-to-many relationship between customer and document until we have a foreign key to the customer table in here. So I'm going to make a foreign key to customer. So a customer ID, and again, the naming convention. That's what we use here at DB Services. All right, so I've made a document ID, a customer ID, and then a container, a document container to store the document. All right, so I've created the basics that I need to implement a documents table in this application. So now I'm going to create a relationship to get this to work. Okay, and so what you'll notice is that the graph is organized in a pretty particular way. This is actually an anchor buoy graph. And you'll see there's like little groups of what are called TOs. So TO stands for table occurrence. And that all that is an occurrence of a table on the graph. It's a pretty literal name here. And so the FileMaker community, FileMaker developers call that TO for short. And so what does that mean, occurrence of a table on a graph? I could add the same table, like this address table, I could add TOs to the graph, occurrences, as many times as I want. So I can keep adding the same table to the graph. So that's why these are called TOs and not just tables. So you're going to hear me use the term TO quite a lot for the rest of the presentation here. Let me get rid of those. All right. So I want to make a relationship to get all the documents for a customer. So let me go ahead and show you how to do that. So the first step is that I need to add a new TO to the graph for two documents. So I'm going to do that right here, this bottom left button. That's how you add a new TO. So I'm just going to select document here in the list of tables. And then I'm going to press OK. And I'll rename it here in a second. I'm going to drag it up here. And now there are, actually, let me just go ahead and rename it. And as far as the naming convention, this is an anchor buoy naming convention that we use at DB Services. Again, you can read the naming conventions article on our website if you want to learn more. And so I'm going to name it like that, customer to document based on customer ID. Okay, at this point, there's two main ways to create a relationship between customer and then this documents TO. And the first way is to use this little button down here to create a relationship. So if I do that, I then need to select the TOs. I'm going to select the left TO, which is the customer, and then I'm going to select the right TO, which is the one that we made this documents TO. So, and then I can keep going making the relationship. I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to show you the second way. The second way is to just drag fields together. Like I'm gonna just go between the TOs. So I just, you know how there's this list of fields here on the TO on the left and the TO on the right. I'm just gonna click on one of these fields and drag it to the other TO. It doesn't matter which one you connect. Just connect any two, and then FileMaker will create the relationship, this line right here, connecting the TOs, and then you can double click on this little white box, and you'll get the same edit relationship dialog. Now, I like doing that way more than I like pressing this little button down here to create a relationship, because if I just drag two fields together and create the relationship, FileMaker automatically knows what TOs to use here in the edit relationship, because I've already set that up. It's just way faster than clicking on these drop downs, especially when you have 500 TOs or 1,000 TOs in bigger, more mature systems. Okay, so I have my relationship dialog set up here. And so now all I need to do is, this is a primary key to foreign key relationship. So I'm going to use customer ID to customer ID. So this is the customer table here on the left, and this is the document table on the right. So customer ID, primary key, customer ID, foreign key. And then I'm going to press the change button. And you're going to want to review down here, because this is actually the predicate. This is the relationship itself. And so this looks right to me. I'm going to press OK. And there you go. I just created a relationship in FileMaker, a basic foreign key or primary key to foreign key relationship of one-to-many. And if I use this relationship on a customer layout, then and if I used it on a portal, I'd be able to see all the documents for that customer. Okay, so let's go back into the edit relationship dialog here. Let's take a look at some other options that you have. So right here in the middle, between the two TOs, you have a list of operators. And so this gives you more capabilities as to what kind of relationships that you can make in FileMaker. So you've got your equals, which is what we use for the primary key to foreign key relationship, but you also have does not equals, right? These are pretty self-explanatory. And then you have your comparison operators for comparison operators, your less thans, your greater thans, etc. And these are most commonly used with dates and number fields. So let me show an example of that. Like, let's say that ABC Automotive was like, hey, it'd be really awesome to see the revenue, the last 365 revenue for a customer, the revenue over the last year for a customer on the customer screen. And so I actually have that here in the customer area. You go over here, under this, like I'm on this customer module on the customer record, and you'll see right here, this last 365, this particular customer had 10K in revenue. And if I keep going through, you'll see this customer had 58, 59 grand, etc. And so it's a really quick way to get some basic reporting out of your system. And all I did was I created a relationship to be able to do that. And so let's take a look at that. And you'll see here, this relationship is a primary key to foreign key relationship again. Customer ID, customer ID, but instead of the documents table, this is the order table. And then we've got two other predicates to further drill down on the data to get you a subset of all of this particular customer's orders. And so this right here, these comparisons are giving me all the orders from the last 365 days. So those comparison operators can definitely add up other possibilities that you can do besides these equals. And then finally, you've got this X down here, which is a little bit of an oddball operator. That is called a Cartesian, and all it does is it tells FileMaker to return every record in the related table. And you're like, okay, so why would I ever want to do that? The most common use case for that in a FileMaker system is to get the record back from a single record table. So an example of that would be like a preferences table, which we have here in FM Quick Start. A preferences table is a one record table that's used to store application-wide settings. So for example, like the logo that's used throughout the application, you could just change it here and it updates everywhere in the application, or the company that's using this application, their address information, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then I actually have an example of that relationship here. You'll see the box, instead of an equals, this white box here, you've got the X that tells you that's Cartesian. And then as far as like what fields to use between the two TOs in the relationship, it doesn't matter. FileMaker, if you tell FileMaker it's Cartesian, use this operator here, FileMaker will just return all the records in the related table no matter what fields you use. So that Cartesians can be really useful for these single record tables. Okay, and then if we go back in here, there's a few more options that you have in setting up relationships. So this allow creation of records in this table via this relationship. This is what people call creation option. And by checking this, you make the relationship a creation relationship. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to create records in this related table using this relationship. So let me give you an example of that. So I have, if I go down to order, the order group here, I have an order to order line item. So this is the line item table. I've got a relationship here. Foreign key to primary key. So this gives me back all of the line items for this particular order. And you'll see in the naming, it's got this CRE, and that stands for creation. If I go in and take a look at the options, you'll see that little allow creation of records in this table is checked. So what that allows you to do, the practical consequence of that is if you have a portal on a layout like this one, this is the relationship we just looked at. If you have a portal to that relationship, you can then create records using the portal. And what FileMaker does is it adds a blank row to the bottom of the portal for you to use to create a new record. So I just created the 7th record, and now I've got another blank row under that to create an 8th record, and now I can create a 9th record, et cetera, et cetera. If I go in and I turn that option off, I uncheck this, allow creation, I go back in here. Now if I scroll down to the bottom, there's no blank line for me to create a new record. You can still create records in that related table, but you have to use a script to do it if you turn off that option. So by far the fastest way as a developer to allow users to create related records is to just check that box and to use that in a portal. So I'm going to go ahead and check that back. So that's the creation option. And then you also see here I've got a deletion, the deletion option check, this delete related records in this table when a record is deleted in the other table. And this is also called cascade deleting. This makes sure that if you delete what's called like a parent record, that its children get deleted. So for example, if I delete this order record, I want these 9 line items to get deleted automatically. I don't want the line items to still exist if the order goes away, because they're kind of like a package, right? It wouldn't make sense for these line items to still exist if the order was gone. It's really important for the integrity of your data that you set up cascade deleting properly, and that you actually do it in the first place. One of the big reasons for that, besides saving space, right? Because if you don't, if you delete a bunch of orders, but there's still line items hanging out there, your database size is bigger than it needs to be. Besides that, the more important thing is that it could affect your reporting. Like you could have, there's times where you need to, if you're creating a report in FileMaker, need to base it off of the line item table. And if you have these line item records floating out to an order that doesn't exist, you're going to end up having the wrong numbers on one of these reports. And that could be a big problem depending on what that report is used for in that company. So cascade delete, really important. It saves you time too as a developer, because otherwise you'd have to script deleting all those related records. And so just by checking that box, you've saved yourself a lot of time. And then finally, you've got sorting. This one's pretty straightforward. You click it and then you tell FileMaker, hey, I want to sort. Let me actually get out of this. Let's go back to that line item relationship. I can tell FileMaker, hey, I want to sort these records. Like I want to sort the line items in this relationship so that the most expensive are first, so descending on unit price. And so yeah, so that's another option that you have in relationships. And there's definitely a lot of times where to solve a problem, you need to have your related records sorted in a relationship. So yeah, so that is the basics on creating relationships in FileMaker. There are other things that I want to touch on here that are important. So one of them is indexing. I'm not going to go into what an index is. As far as what you need to know as a FileMaker developer, you just need to know that the fields that you're using on the destination side of a relationship, and in the case of Anchor Buoy, the right side of a relationship, those fields need to be indexable. If they aren't indexable, then your relationship's not going to work. When I first started developing in FileMaker, that tripped me up a lot. There was a lot of times where I wanted to use a non-indexable field on the right side of the relationship, and then the relationship wouldn't give me back the results I wanted, or wouldn't give me back results at all. And so you can tell which fields are indexable or not by like going to that field, and if you double click on the field, you'll bring up the options. You go to storage here, the storage tab, you'll see indexing here, and if these are active, like you can actually change it, everything's good, you know that field is indexable. If I go to like one of these right here, and I go to storage option, is calculation, you'll see that do not store calculation results, recalculate as when needed. That's checked. If I try to uncheck it, well, this is actually a bad example because I could do that. Sorry, let's go to this one, subtotal. I can't do that here. So if I go to storage options and I uncheck this, FileMaker will bring back an error message that says, hey, this can't be stored or indexed for X, Y, or Z reasons. So that's usually the most common trip up that I'll see with a lot of new developers, is that they'll try to use like unstored calculations on the right side of a relationship, and then FileMaker will be like, no, can't do that. And then, yeah, so that's all you need to really know, is that you have to use indexable fields on the right side of a relationship. Okay, and then I want to go over a few complex relationships that are going to be useful to you as a developer, because you're going to come across these a lot. And so the first thing that I want to go over is a thing called chaining TOs to drill through data. And so there are times where you want to get information that is not in the table. The related table is in a different related table. And so let me give you an example of this, because I think an example will help illustrate it. Let's say that ABC Automotive came back to us and said, hey, I like what we have here on the order screen, this line item portal. I like all these fields, but I also want to see the vendor for this product. Like, I want to be able to see it on the order here. It really helps me out just to see that list. And they're like, hey, I don't want you to store that vendor inside the line item table. Like, I don't want to take up space like that. I just want a reference. You're like, okay, well, the vendor field is in the product table, but this portal is showing line item records. So how can I show a field from the product table here on the line item portal? The way to do that is to create a relationship off of this line item relationship to product. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to make that here. Order to order line item to product based on product ID. Okay, whoops. Here we go. And then I'm going to drag any two fields together to create the relationship between the two TOs. And then I'm going to double click here to get to the relationship to set it up. And then I want to do product ID to product ID, because this is another primary key, foreign key relationship. All right, so I'm reviewing here. That looks good, product ID. Great. And then, so what I've done here is I've chained TOs together to get the data that I want. So I'm starting here, I'm going through here, and then I'm ending up here to get the data to solve the customer's request of showing vendor on the portal. So let me show you this here. I'm just gonna delete some of these fields to make some room for us. And I'm gonna copy this, and we're gonna put vendor here. And then I'm gonna change this field to use our new TO, our new relationship, which is right here, to product, the chaining. And then I'm gonna select vendor. So you'll see I now have access to all the product fields for this line item by making that relationship. So you'll see right here, we've got the vendor for that product, and I'm not storing a copy of that vendor in the line item table. I'm saving space by just referencing it right there. Okay, so that's chaining TOs together. You can go as many deep as you want to. I know I just showed you an example where it was 3 TOs chained together, but you can go even further. You can make 4, 5, 6. It's really up to whatever it is you're trying to solve. So FileMaker, chaining TOs is really powerful. You can do a ton of things by knowing how to do that. Okay, another example of a more complex relationship that is useful, that crops up a lot, is something called a self-relationship. So self-relationships are relationships back to the same table. An example of this would be like, let's say that ABC Automotive came back again and they go, hey, great job in the whole vendor thing. I need you to do one more. I need one more thing here. I need to be able to see an order history for that customer on the order screen. So like whenever I'm placing an order for a customer, it'd be nice if I could actually look at their order history, things they ordered previously placed, as a means to maybe upsell them, ask them, oh, hey, do you want to purchase this? I saw you purchase it last time, blah, blah, blah. And so you're like, yeah, I can do that for you. And so all you do is in FileMaker here on the relationship graph, I'm going to do a relationship to orders. So it's going to be order to order, and this is what makes it a self. And then this is going to be the customer ID. So this is not going to be the relationships that you've been seeing so far. This is not a primary key to foreign key relationship. This is just, me relating 2 fields together that actually makes sense, because this is what's going to give me what I want back. And so in this case, I'm going, hey, take the customer, this order right here, grab its customer ID, and then give me back all of the orders with that same customer. So yeah, so this is the self relationship here that I would use for order history for ABC Automotive. Okay, so that's a self relationship. And then finally, the last thing I want to show you with complex relationships is OR relationships. So what do I mean by an OR relationship? All the relationships that we've been setting up so far have been AND relationships. So like if I click here on this 365 relationship we saw to get the revenue for the last 365 days for a customer, you'll see the 3 predicates here. You'll see right here on the left, there's this AND. What this means is that like these 3 predicates all work together to get me, like they all have to be true, right? This needs to be true, and this needs to be true, and this needs to be true. So it's like you're making subsets of subsets of subsets, basically. You're drilling down, drilling down, drilling down. What if I wanted to do an OR, right? Because there might be times where that's what I need to solve a problem. So let me give an example of an OR. So if I go to dashboard, I've set this up here. So I've got, on this dashboard, I have a list of open quotes, right? And on the right, there's this quote status. And there's a few in here. There's pending, on hold, sent, but all these are considered open. Let's say that my list was really long, and I had like 100 in here, and I wanted to filter by, I wanted to get rid of the on hold. I just wanted to see pending and sent. So I checked these little filters here, and now my list is just pending and sent. For me to have done what I just did using a relationship, I need to do an OR. I'm basically going, hey, FileMaker, I want all quotes that are pending or sent. And the way to do that is to do a return to limited list on the left side of the relationship with the values that you want to query. In this case, we want to query pending and sent. So let me show you what that looks like. So if I go here, this is the return to limited list, so they're just on separate lines. So I've got pending here and sent. This field is dictated by my little checkbox set that I have back here on the dashboard. So just to show you what I mean, if I uncheck this, you'll see that this changes. If I uncheck that, there you go. If I check these guys. But you'll see FileMaker's checkbox set actually creates a return to limited list for you, and that's really convenient because In this case, I want to then query, I want to get both, when I make a relationship that's based on what I've checked, I want FileMaker to search for both of these independently. Okay, so if we go to the relationship graph, I can show you the portal, the relationship the portal is using, and it's going to be more complex than just a basic, just the relationship, the OR relationship. But so you pretty much want to ignore these first three predicates. All you need to look at here is this quote status. This is the return delimited list here, and what FileMaker is doing is it's basically searching for that first value, the pending in our example here in the quote. It's finding all those matching quotes, and then it's also doing a search for sent over here in quote, and then it's combining the results together to get your overall result set. So if you want to do a logical OR in FileMaker, you need to use return delimited list to do that. So those are our three complex relationships that you use quite a lot in FileMaker: the chaining TOs, drill through data, the self relationships, and the OR relationships. Okay, so let's get back here to our slideshow. Excuse me. I want to talk about ERDs, briefly touch on them. So now that you know how to put together a data model from a problem set, from an example problem, and then you can implement those relationships in FileMaker. The next thing is to take a look at ERDs here. ERDs are they're a graphical representation of a data model. And when it comes to development, they're a way for you to document your data model in a way that any other database developer should be able to understand. It's a standard that's used across other database systems, not just FileMaker. And so this is an example right here on the right. This is an example of the ABC Automotives application. These are the entities minus our documents table that we just made. These are the example problems entities, the initial example problem. And so the structure of this is that boxes are entities, the lines between them are relationships, and then these symbols on the lines are what are called cardinality. So that the symbols tell you what kind of relationship it is. Is it a one to many? Is it many to many, etc. So like if you take a look at order, the line item, the way to read this is to go, an order can have one to many line items. And then if you look back and go the other way, a line item can have one and only one order. So that's how you interpret these ERDs. And so just by looking at this, I can get a quick snapshot of just this data model and understand you can sort of get a sense of the complexity and what you're dealing with pretty quickly. So I highly recommend that you create ERDs for any system that it starts to get fairly large, medium to large systems. I don't know, more than 15 tables, more than 20 tables. If they're small enough, then usually people can figure out what's going on pretty quickly. But once it gets to a certain size, then if you want to try to onboard new developers to a system, it's a lot easier if there's an ERD to reference. And as far as creating ERDs, you can do that old school with pen and paper or a whiteboard, or you can also use software out there, like Visio, like Microsoft Visio is one, Lucidchart's another one that's a cloud-based one. As far as like creating the initial ERD, if paper, you like paper a lot better, go for it, but you should then transcribe that digitally for maintaining moving forward. It's going to make your diagrams a lot more consistent, a lot easier to maintain across multiple authors if it's digital. And then the other thing that I really like about ERDs is the act of creating them themselves. So when I'm handed a sizable existing system, the first thing that I usually do is I create an ERD. And what that does is it documents the system, but it also helps me understand the data model. Like as I'm going through and creating the ERD, I'm basically going through those steps that I showed you initially with determining entities and attributes and the relationship between them. I'm going through that to understand what's there. And so I think it's a really good exercise. It kills two birds in one stone. Okay, so ERDs, you just saw those. They represent the natural relationships between entities, the primary keys, foreign keys. In relation to ERDs, what's FileMaker's relationship graph? Well, FileMaker's relationship graph is not an ERD. I mean, from what you've seen, it definitely looks a lot different. FileMaker's relationship graph is a collection of queries that's in your FileMaker file. It's as simple as that. It's not meant to be anything more. The graph in FileMaker is a very functional graph. It's pretty much any time that you need to solve a problem and that problem requires you to make a new relationship, you just go in the graph and you make it. And then you can reuse that relationship later for a second thing or a third thing or a fourth thing if that ends up being useful, ends up being there for you to use. But at the end of the day, it's not an ERD. FileMaker's relationship graph is not an ERD. And one of the other big things about differences between ERDs and FileMaker's relationship graph is that context is critical in FileMaker's graph. FileMaker's graph uses context to resolve your relationship and give you back the answer, give you back your result set. While in ERD, it doesn't matter where, like in what context an ERD is used, like those natural relationships, those primary key to foreign key relationships are always the same. So with relationship being critical, I wanted to go into that in a little more detail to kind of drive the point home. This right here, these are two pictures of the two main areas where context is defined in FileMaker in regards to the relationship graph. And so the two main places, whenever you say context to a FileMaker developer, like the number one thing they're going to think about is what's the TO that's tied to the layout. And that's what, like right here, this is actually a screenshot from Layout Setup. And then the second place they're going to think of is what's the context of the calculation that's in managed database. And you can set that here, and you can see FileMaker uses the word context here. Evaluate this calculation from the context of. Okay, so why is context important? As I mentioned before, all relationships evaluate in a context. And because of that, the same relationship, the same TO could give different results in different contexts. So an example of that is the product relationship being used in customer versus being used in sales order. So what does that mean? I have made a second version of FM Quick Start that is set up. It's almost identical. The difference is that I have taken the TOs, the base tables of our example problem, the 5 main tables, the ones that are in your ERD, and I've connected them together. Unlike the original one, the Anchor Buoy one we've been using, I'm not connecting the groups together like I am here. So I'm connecting those 5 groups together: the address, customer, order, line item, and product. You'll see that there's a line that connects all of them together. And so what does that mean? That means that I can now use TOs, like I can use a product TO over here in like the customer context, because FileMaker now has a way to actually walk the graph from here all the way to here because it can follow one of these lines. All right, so take a look at this, okay? So if I go to customer, I've also created a new tab here, and this tab is using the product TO, and the context that I'm in is the customer TO here. Again, this is under layout setup, the picture I showed you at the beginning of this section. So the customer TO is our context, and we are trying to get product records from it. So what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? FileMaker will start on the TO tied to the layout. Okay, it's going to start here, and then it's going to walk the graph. It's going to follow the shortest path. going to walk the graph all the way to your ending point, your ending TO, which is that TO that's used on the portal. In this case, it's the product TO. So that's my ending point. And so what FileMaker is going to do is it's going to evaluate relationships between TOs until it gets to your end, and then we'll give you your answer back. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going from product, and this is the first relationship between. I'm starting from customer, and I would go all the way to product. So the first relationship FileMaker's got to evaluate is customer to order. So in this case, if you look back here, I'm on Tyrion's record. So I'm going to get, this relationship is going to give me all of Tyrion's orders. You're like, all right, so now I'm here, and FileMaker's going to keep walking. And it's, now that here's this relationship's got to resolve. So it's going to take all of the orders, Tyrion's orders, and get all of the line items for all of the orders. And so now I'm here. All right. So this is all of the line items for all of the orders for Tyrion. And then it's going to keep walking. And then here's this relationship, and this is giving me back all of the products for all of the line items for Tyrion. And that is the end. So that's what FileMaker is going to give me. And so that's why I called this tab products purchased, because this list right here is every product that Tyrion has ever purchased. Even though there's 8 orders and all these have variable amounts of line items, at the end of the day, these are the unique list of products that Tyrion has ever ordered. So that's what that gives me. Now, if I go to a different context, if I go to the order context, and if I go in here in layout mode and take a look, the TO here is order. It's not customer, it's order, so different context. But I have created a new tab here called products on this order. And this portal uses the same product TO that the customer did. The only difference between the customer and then this order here is the context. The starting point is different. So our starting point is order. So let me show you what happens here. So FileMaker is going to start at order, and it's going to walk and evaluate this relationship, which is going to give me all the line items back for this order. And then it's going to walk this line, the product, and give me back all the products for the line items for this order. And so that's what this gives me. And that's why the number, the list here is different. This is 3 products versus the customer screen there were 5, because these are all the unique products on this order. So I've used the same TO 2 different places, and I've gotten 2 different answers. And the only way for me to know what answer I'm going to get back is, besides memorizing all of these different relationships, is I actually have to go to the relationship graph, and I've got to follow the path from start to finish to understand what FileMaker is going to give me. So that's why context matters. Where you use something will give you a different answer. Okay, so let's finish up here. Now that you understand context a little better, let's evaluate the 2 most popular graph methodologies that you'll see in the wild out here. We've got spider graphs and anchor buoy graphs. So what's a spider graph? And I haven't shown you any spider graphs today, but this is an example of one that actually is one of our existing customers. And so the characteristic of spider graph is that all of the TOs are connected. It's pretty much like one big blob or mothership or whatever. And the way that it kind of starts that way. Well, let me back up here. Spider graphs are the most natural for beginning developers. And I think the reason why is that when you create a new FileMaker file and you add tables to that file, FileMaker will add TOs to the graph for those tables. So if I added, like, let's say, our example problem again, our ABC automotive, let's say I went in and I added those 5 tables. FileMaker will have a TO on the graph for each of those tables. And then if you go to the relationship graph at that point, it kind of seems like it's an ERD. It's kind of laid out like it. There's no relationships yet, but you've got your 5 TOs there. And so I think people are they want to create the natural relationships at that point between them, the primary key to foreign key. So that's what people do. They connect everything together. And then at that point, once they need another relationship that's not just a natural relationship, they'll then create them and they'll connect them to all the existing connected TOs, and everything just stays connected and it just becomes a big blob. The problem with it is what I showed you there with the context. It's hard to follow. It takes a while for you to figure out what you're going to be returned in a relationship, especially if it's going across a bunch of relationships. You have to go in the relationship graph and like follow the path to understand what you're going to get back, and that can take time, especially if you're trying, like if you're reading a script or in layout mode looking at a portal or a calculation and you see a TO being used, then you're like, I'm not sure what that thing's returning. You then have to get out of the calculation, go to manage database, go to the relationship graph, then follow the path, figure out what it's returning, and then go back to where you were to continue reading the code. It's very disruptive. That can take you a couple minutes, and that stuff adds up over time. Reading code is a lot slower in that environment. But that's a spider graph. It's natural. You'll see it a lot. In really small systems, it's not a big deal, but when you got something crazy like this, it becomes very hard to work with. And so let's look at Anchor Buoy, and that's what our FM Quick Start was using. Anchor Buoy is the most popular way to do graphs in the FileMaker community for experienced developers, and the reason for that is because it's self-describing. The TO names are the paths that FileMaker takes on the graph, and that's what makes it so powerful. Is like if I show you an example of this, if I go back in here, let's look at this again. Go down to order. Like if I go and look at the chaining TOs, this right here tells me how FileMaker is going to evaluate, like what kind of records it's going to get back. It's going to start at order, give me back all the order line items for that order, and then give me the products back for those order line items. So I can just be reading the code and see this TO, and just by the name I go, oh, I know what's returning. It's returning all the products for the order. Great. So that saved me the trouble of having to go in the relationship graph and figure out what it's doing. So Anchor Buoy, self-describing, and the other big thing is that it makes context explicit. The buoys there, the relationships, those TOs, the first part of it is the context that you use those TOs in. So it's making context explicit, and that really helps new developers. It helps experienced developers, but it really highlights when you're reading FileMaker code that FileMaker is a context-based environment and that you need to pay attention to context. And so it's no secret. You saw it with our template. We use Anchor Buoy, and we even go so far as to convert spider graphs to Anchor Buoy, which is definitely not an easy thing to do. Anchor Buoy saves a ton of time, like I said, because it's self-describing. You don't have to go into the relationship graph at all. And yeah, again, our naming conventions article, which I have referenced a lot, you can go to this link here, follow this link, and read for more information on Anchor Buoy and other naming conventions that we have. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. I've got a couple more slides here, and then we'll get to your question. So about DB services here, our mission is to make organizations more efficient and effective through custom applications. We're a full-service FileMaker consultancy offering application development, support, training and coaching, cloud hosting, and we're authorized resellers of licenses. To learn more, go to www.dbservices.com or call our main line at 1-888-488-0191. The template that I use throughout this presentation is our own free FileMaker template called FM Quick Start. You can download it at fmquickstart.com. And then finally, here is contact info on the FM Academy. You can reach us via our website, email, Facebook, or Twitter. Okay, so questions. Will this be recorded? Yes. This session is recorded, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel and also on the FM Academy website. All right. So there's a question about what would I recommend for a simple ERD software. I had mentioned Lucidchart. That is a cloud-based one. You don't need to install any software, so I do recommend that one quite a lot. There's other ones out there that you can look at, and then you can also use Microsoft Visio. That's a really good graphing tool that we've used here at DB Services for a number of years. Are there any caveats to using UUIDs? UIDs are becoming more common than serial numbers in the community, mainly because of syncing. So FileMaker, you can actually build FileMaker to be capable to be used offline. And you'll see that most commonly with like mobile applications, like if you have technicians going out into an area that they have spotty cellular connection, internet connectivity, that you can have your FileMaker system so it's not actually talking to a server, it's just all used offline. And then when they get back into a good place of connection, like a Wi-Fi or what have you, they can then sync. But the only way you can make sure that you don't have collisions with primary keys is that you have to use UUIDs. So that's where a lot of that comes from. The only downside is that it takes up more space. I mean, those UUIDs are really long versus serial numbers. Serial numbers are a lot shorter, and because it takes up more space, it actually can slow down the resolution of relationships as well, because these are just bigger pieces of text. But I would say that unless you have hundreds of thousands to millions of records in a table, I don't think it's anything you need to worry about. So what does the T stand for in that double_KPT ID? Again, you can check out our naming conventions article on our website to understand exactly our naming conventions with primary keys, foreign keys, relationships, etc. The T is the data type of the field, so that stands for text. Some primary keys, like for using serial numbers, it would be double_KPN ID instead of double_KPT ID. Okay, so I didn't really touch on this. Bidirectionality on the relationship graph. The relationship graph can be used bidirectionally, so FileMaker can go from left to right or right to left. It doesn't actually matter to it, as long as it can go from start to finish. That's what it cares about. As long as there's lines that connect the starting TO to the ending TO, FileMaker will give you a thumbs up and it will give you results back. The reason why I didn't go into that much is with Anchor Buoy, we embrace Anchor Buoy. Spider graphs, again, are natural, and I think when you first start out. But with Anchor Buoys, left to right, you force a directionality on the graph with Anchor Buoy. You make it unidirectional, and the reason you do that is because you have to put in a path name in there. And I think it also just ends up making more sense to you if you read it from right to left, because the whole English, reads from right to left, or a lot of languages read right to left. So that's where I think a lot of that comes from. But yeah, FileMaker can go both ways. It's just, it gets a lot harder to understand. And if you're naming with Anchor Buoy, you should, use it unidirectionally. Otherwise, it's going to be harder to understand. Okay. Let's see, I'll answer a couple more questions and then we're going to have to end the webinar here. I will try to answer all the other questions and post them on the FM Academy website as well, so don't worry if I don't get to your question. Okay. Should there be a natural limit to the number of buoys in an Anchor Buoy model? No. At the end of the day, FileMaker's graph is just a collection of queries. So make as many buoys as you want to solve the problems that you're trying to solve. I mean, there is a point where FileMaker's relationship graph becomes unwieldy. Like if you have 1,000, 2,000 TOs on the graph, it becomes very hard to find things. It's less of a performance concern or a technical limitation and more of just a limit. It becomes just hard to work with. It's an efficiency thing. And so, the answer to your question is no, there is no limit, but, hopefully, if you are going to end up working in a system that big, it becomes critical that you organize your graph properly, like you have an organization scheme so people can find stuff easily. Okay, and then final question here before we end, is selector connector considered a spider graph? So that's a good question. Selector connector is actually a hybrid. And I like selector connector because it still maintains the biggest benefit of Anchor Buoy, which is self-description. It's still self-describing, but it allows you to take advantage of the biggest benefit of Spider, which is modularity. So the answer to your question is it's both. And you know, as far as what you should start out learning, if you have only been using Spider, or if you're just new to development, I would do strict Anchor Buoy and live in that environment for a while, and then you can start playing around with selector connector after you understand it a little more. But it's definitely a really powerful technique, and it can save you a good amount of time depending on what you are trying to build with it. All right, so I will answer the remaining questions I didn't get to on the website. Thank you all for joining me today. Have a good day.